Julius Caesar's beginnings may sound like the start of an ordinary Roman child, but every step in his early life seemed to whisper a larger destiny. Born in 100 BCE into the Iuli family, which claimed descent from Venus herself through Aeneid, Caesar grew up surrounded by stories of divine origins and heroic ancestors. Rome at this time was no peaceful republic, but a city divided between the power of elites and the cries of ordinary people. Markets buzzed with gossip of political unrest. Soldiers returned from bloody campaigns in Spain and the East, and senators schemed in their marble halls. Against this backdrop, a curious, sharp-eyed boy walked the narrow streets, listening and learning. He was not yet the legend we know, but his restless ambition was already visible. Unlike other noble children who were content to inherit titles, Caesar wanted more. He wanted to shape the world, not just live in it. His education in rhetoric, philosophy, and the art of persuasion gave him tools, sharper than swords, and even as a child, those who met him felt he was destined to stand at the center of her. Exile became both punishment and opportunity. Without wealth or safety in Rome, Caesar joined the army, throwing himself into military campaigns abroad. In Asia Minor, he displayed a fearlessness that impressed commanders and fellow soldiers alike. During one siege, he was said to have grabbed a ladder, scaled the enemy wall under a hail of missiles, and urged others to follow, whether embellished or true. Such tales spread quickly, and Caesar began to be seen not only as a nobleman but as a warrior. Soldiers respected him because he shared their hardships. He ate the same rations, marched through the same mud, and risked the same wounds. This bond would later prove vital. Armies do not fight merely for a path, they fight for leaders they believe in. Caesar learned this lesson young, and he carried it as a weapon sharper than any blade. Rome's storms. When civil war broke out between the forces of Marius and Sulla, Caesar was thrust into political chaos before he had even reached manhood. His family ties connected him to Marius, making him a natural enemy of Sulla, the ruthless general who seized power and became dictator. Sulla demanded obedience, but Caesar refused to abandon his wife Cornelia, who came from a family loyal to Marius. That act of defiance could have cost him his life. Stripped of his inheritance and marked as a potential traitor, Caesar was forced into hiding. Friends smuggled him from house to house, and at times he disguised himself to escape Sulla's men. This brush with death was not a passing shadow, it was the first real test of Caesar's resolve. Many would have bent the knee, sacrificed marriage for safety, but not him. His refusal showed a boldness beyond his years, a refusal to live small even when survival was at stake. These scars would shape him forever. Perhaps the most famous tale of his early life came when pirates captured him, sailing 2 roads to study rhetoric. Caesar was seized and held for ransom. Most men would have trembled, but Caesar treated his captors as if he were their commander. He laughed at them, joined their games, and even scolded them for not understanding who they had taken. When they asked for a ransom of 20 talents, he insisted they raise it to 50, declaring he was worth more. During his captivity, he wrote poetry and speeches, often reciting them aloud, warning the pirates that he would one day return to punish them. They laughed. But once freed, Caesar assembled ships, hunted them down, and executed justice. This episode revealed the core of Caesar's character: fearless, audacious, and unwilling to let any insult go unanswered. Back in Rome, Caesar began weaving his way into politics. He understood that success in the Republic required more than military courage, it required the ability to win hearts and minds. His speeches sparkled with wit and passion, captivating crowds in the forum. He smiled easily, remembered names, and treated common citizens as if they mattered. He sponsored games, feasts, and public works, gestures that made him beloved by the people but deeply distrusted by elites. Senators, with their wrinkled brows and endless suspicion, muttered that he was too ambitious, too dangerous. In every gesture of generosity, they saw a ladder to power. Caesar, however, understood the secret of Rome. The crowd's roar was often louder than the Senate's decrees. Marriage became one of Caesar's most useful political weapons. His unions were never just personal but strategic, linking him with powerful families. His marriage to Cornelia tied him to Marius's allies. Later, when political winds shifted, he adjusted, connecting himself to families that could open new doors. Mariafe, AHA, alliance, was a move on the chessboard of Rome. For Caesar, love was less about emotion and more about ambition. He knew destiny could be guided by bloodlines as much as by bravery, and he was never afraid to use relationships as stepping stones toward higher ground. In Rome, politics was a dangerous arena. Smiles often hid daggers, and every friendship carried the possibility of betrayal. Caesar's brilliance lay in his ability to charm both allies and enemies. To play the long game without showing his full hand, he laughed with rivals, joined their feasts, and then maneuvered around them when the moment was right. Slowly, steadily, he rose through Rome's political offices, climbing the cursus, anorum the ladder of power. Unlike reckless men who rushed and stumbled, Caesar's rise was patient yet unstoppable, like a tide rolling toward shore. His partnership with Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, gave him the financial backing needed to challenge rivals. Crassus provided gold, Caesar provided charisma, and together they built a formidable political machine. Later, when Pompey the Great joined them, the first triumvirate was born on an alliance that shook the Senate to its core. With money, military prestige, and popularity combined, they controlled Rome's destiny. But alliances in Rome rarely lasted. Ambition and ego would eventually tear this union apart, leaving Caesar to face betrayal on a scale that would test everything he had built. The people, however, adored him. He distributed land to veterans, pushed reforms that aided the poor, and ensured bread and entertainment for the masses. His name was cheered in the streets, painted on walls, and whispered in crowded taverns. For many Romans, Caesar was not just another politician, he was a hero who listened to them. But for senators, his popularity was alarming. A leader loved too much by the people could become a king. Rome had sworn never to suffer kings again. In every cheer, the Senate heard a warning bell. By the end of his early career, Caesar was no longer simply a nobleman or soldier. He had become something larger, a symbol of hope for the poor, a rival to the Senate's power, and a storm gathering on Rome's horizon. His name carried both admiration and fear. Depending on who spoke it, the stage was set for destiny. Power beckoned, betrayal lurked, and the man who dreamed of more than titles was about to step into the spotlight of history itself. Caesar's rise through the ranks of Roman politics was no accident. It was a masterclass in charm, calculation, and risk. While others relied on brute force or inherited power, Caesar combined multiple tools: his sharp tongue, his daring military service, and his ability to connect with the ordinary Roman citizen. He realized early that the Senate, filled with rivalries and suspicion, could only be managed by balancing flattery with pressure. He gave them speeches filled with wit and appeals to tradition. But outside the Senate, he gave the people games, festivals, and grain subsidies. He built loyalty across multiple layers of society, weaving together a coalition of soldiers, commoners, and wealthy backers. This careful construction of influence was like building a bridge, stone by stone, seemingly ordinary, but eventually strong enough to carry the weight of his ambition. One of Caesar's greatest advantages was his gift of oratory. His voice, described by ancient sources as high-pitched but commanding, could sway crowds in the forum. He knew how to ignite emotions, to turn complaints into movements, and to make the people see him not as an aristocrat above them, but as a champion among them. Each speech was crafted like a performance, filled with anecdotes, humor, and promises that resonated deeply. He did not lecture the people. He entertained and persuaded them. For the Senate, this was dangerous. An aristocrat who could win over the masses was always a potential tyrant. But for Caesar, it was simply the beginning of a destiny he felt written in the stars. The Roman Republic at this time was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Corruption was rampant, debt crushed the poor, and the Senate was increasingly out of touch with the struggles of ordinary citizens. Caesar positioned himself as the answer. He pushed reforms that redistributed land to veterans, expanded citizenship, and supported measures to stabilize grain supply. His opponents sneered, claiming he was buying popularity, but his supporters saw him as a savior. It was here that Caesar's philosophy became clear. Politics was not just about laws, it was about image. He mastered the art of appearing as a man of the people, while never ceasing to be a man of power. As Caesar climbed higher, enemies multiplied. Rome was a city where ambition was both celebrated and feared. Rivals whispered in the marble corridors of the Curia, accusing him of overreaching, of aiming for kingship, the dirtiest word in the Republic's vocabulary. Yet Caesar pressed forward, ignoring the venom of his critics. He had tasted danger before Sulla, from pirates, from battlefields, and he had survived each time. Opposition was simply another storm to weather, and Caesar had no intention of retreating when he could advance. His alliances became crucial to his rise. Wealth was power in Rome, and few men were wealthier than Crassus. By aligning with him, Caesar gained the resources needed to fund public games and secure influence. Later, the addition of Pompey, the celebrated general, formed what became known as the First Triumvirate. This informal alliance was not written into law, but was more powerful than any legal decree. Together, they divided power and influence, pushing aside senatorial opposition. It was a reminder that in Rome, politics was not about ideals. It was about survival and control. Caesar, once a threatened youth hiding from Sulla, was now one-third of the most powerful force in Rome. Despite this success, Caesar never forgot the importance of the people. He continued to build his base among the poor and middle classes, ensuring their loyalty with both policy and spectacle. He knew that soldiers would fight not just for Rome but for a leader who cared for them, who remembered their names, who shared their hardships. The Senate could despise him, but as long as the people adored him, he was untouchable. This dual strategy, fearless military leadership and deep populist connection, was what set Caesar apart from so many other ambitious men whose names faded into dust. The Senate's fear grew as Caesar's star rose higher. Each reform, each alliance, each victory seemed to chip away at their control. They worried not only about his popularity, but about the precedent he set. If Caesar could bend the rules of the Republic to his advantage, what stopped others from doing the same? And if the people could elevate a man beyond the Senate's grasp, what became of their centuries-old traditions? For Caesar, these concerns were meaningless. He saw the Republic not as an untouchable relic, but as a tool, something that could be reshaped if destiny required it. Yet ambition came at a cost. Enemies plotted, rivals fumed, and even allies began to question how long their partnership could last. Crassus grew uneasy with Caesar's charisma overshadowing his wealth. Pompey, once his ally, would one day become his enemy. The cracks in the triumvirate were inevitable, because in Rome, power was too addictive to be shared for long. Caesar, however, was prepared. He had never relied solely on allies. His true foundation was the loyalty of the people and the legions. As long as they stood with him, betrayal could be survived. Caesar's character combined audacity with patience. He knew when to wait, when to strike, and when to charm. This flexibility made him nearly unstoppable. He could laugh with rivals in the Senate, then command brutal efficiency on the battlefield. He could spend lavishly on games, then walk among soldiers like a humble comrade. This adaptability was not hypocrisy, it was strategy. Caesar lived by the principle that survival in Rome required wearing many masks, and he wore them all well. By the time his political career reached new heights, Caesar was no longer just a man. He had become a force of presence that dominated every conversation, every debate, every calculation in Rome. Senators feared him, soldiers idolized him, and the people adored him. Yet in every shadow lurked the question: was Caesar building a future for the Republic, or preparing to end it? For now, his story was still rising, and history held its breath, waiting to see how far he would go. When Caesar turned his gaze northward to Gaul, most senators thought they were sending him to a troublesome frontier, a backwater filled with warring tribes and endless headaches. But Caesar didn't see Gaul as a burden. He saw a stage. Here was a land fractured by rivalries, where tribes battled to one another as often as they battled Rome. To Caesar, this was an opportunity not just to protect Rome's borders, but to carve out glory that no one in the Senate could ignore. He moved with astonishing speed, using diplomacy when it suited him, and unleashing his legions when persuasion failed. Each tribe subdued became another step toward something larger. By the time Rome realized what he was doing, Caesar had transformed Gaul from a frontier problem into a theater for his personal rise, proving that he wasn't just another governor. He was building the foundation of his destiny. The Gallic tribes, at first, underestimated Caesar. They had seen Roman officials come and go, most focused on bribes and taxes. Caesar was different. He studied their alliances, understood their rivalries, and struck with perfect timing. He could sit in a chieftain's tent, praising his courage one night, and surround him with soldiers the next morning if loyalty wavered. His combination of charm and ruthlessness left opponents dizzy. For his men, it looked like brilliance. Caesar dismantled the fragile unity of Gaul, turning tribe against tribe until Rome's presence seemed inevitable. Conquest was not just about swords, it was about psychology. Caesar was rewriting the rules of leadership in a land that had never seen his like before. But Caesar didn't stop with the sword, he also wielded the pen. Every campaign was recorded in his Commentary de Bello Gallico, reports written in calm, clear language that gave the illusion of pure fact. By writing in the third person, Caesar appeared objective, as though history itself were observing him. These accounts spread across Rome, thrilling ordinary citizens and unsettling his enemies. Senators realized they weren't just facing a general, they were facing a storyteller who shaped how the Republic saw him. His victories lived not only in fields and fortresses, but in the minds of readers who believed they were witnessing destiny. Through words as much as battles, Caesar turned himself into Rome's hero. The loyalty of his legions became legendary. Unlike other commanders who dined in luxury while their men starved, Caesar marched Nate and froze beside his soldiers. He shared their struggles, rewarding bravery, remembering names, and distributing spoils fairly. His men saw him not as a distant patrician, but as one of their own, a leader who bled with them. This bond was more powerful than laws or Senate decrees. When Caesar asked them to march through mud, snow, or across rivers, they obeyed not out of fear, but devotion. His legions would later follow him against Rome itself, because their loyalty was not to the Republic, it was to Caesar. Gold, however, did not surrender easily. Out of the forests rose a leader to rival Caesar's ambition. Versed, young, charismatic, and determined, he united tribes long divided by jealousy and suspicion. Suddenly, Caesar faced an opponent who matched him in vision. This was not a raid or a skirmish, this was destiny colliding with destiny. Where Caesar relied on discipline and Roman engineering, Vercingetorix inspired passion and a dream of independence. For the first time, Caesar met a leader who might truly stop him. The clash between them would not just decide the fate of Gaul, but echo across centuries as a test of will, strategy, and endurance. Years of maneuvering unfolded. As Caesar wove his strategy across the Gallic landscape, each tribe subdued was another stone in the monument he was building. Some submitted to his negotiations, others fell to his steel. Every victory enriched his coffers and strengthened his reputation back in Rome. Yet the Senate grew anxious. They had given him command, but now they watched uneasily as his influence grew unchecked. To them, Caesar was no longer serving Rome, he was serving himself. And they weren't wrong. Every battle, every coin of loot, every word in his commentary was calculated to build not only Rome's empire, but Caesar's own personal power. In Rome, the reaction was split. Ordinary citizens adored him, celebrating his victories as proof of Rome's greatness. Markets buzzed with his name, and children played games, pretending to be Caesar's soldiers. But among senators, admiration soured into fear. Pompey, once his ally, began to distance himself, worried that Caesar's glory outshone his own. In a republic designed for balance, Caesar tilted the scales dangerously. Some hailed him as savior, others whispered tyrant, but everyone agreed. He was no longer just a general, he was a force reshaping the republic itself. The Senate tried to curb him, but Caesar outmaneuvered them. Political allies in Rome secured him extended commands, while victories silenced critics. Each campaign stretched his influence further. Each season deepened the loyalty of his legions. Rome's laws could threaten him, but laws meant little without soldiers to enforce them. Caesar had both ink and iron on his side. Slowly but surely, he was eroding the Republic's authority, preparing for a confrontation no one could stop. By then, the Senate were not rulers, they were spectators, watching a master play the game better than anyone before. The defining moment came at Alesia. Vercingetorix fortified himself within the city, expecting reinforcements to arrive. Caesar responded with genius. He built two massive walls, one to trap the enemy inside, and another to block armies approaching from outside. It was an engineering miracle and a psychological blow. Trapped between hunger and Roman steel, the Gauls fought bravely but could not break free. Eventually, Vercingetorix surrendered, his dream of a united Gaul crushed. For Caesar, it was not merely a victory, it was his masterpiece. In one stroke, he'd secured Gaul and elevated his name to immortal status. The fall of Alesia shook the Republic. Rome erupted with joy, erecting statues and honoring Caesar as the conqueror of nations. But triumph brought danger. Senators no longer saw him as a tool of the Republic, but as a threat to it. Pompey's caution turned to hostility, and whispers of plots filled the Senate halls. Caesar had wealth, fame, and the unwavering loyalty of hardened soldiers. The question was no longer whether he could rival Rome's leaders, but whether he could rival the Republic itself. The battlefield had given him glory. The next fight, inevitable, deadly, and closer than ever, would be fought in the heart of Rome. Caesar returned from Gaul as more than just a general. He was a living legend. His name echoed across Rome, his victories celebrated in markets, forums, and even whispered in the homes of ordinary citizens. Yet the applause masked an undercurrent of fear. Senators began to wonder if Caesar had grown too powerful, too adored, too dangerous. Among them, Pompey, once Caesar's greatest ally, watched with unease. Their alliance, which had once shaken the Republic, was slowly turning into rivalry. Pompey had long been Rome's golden boy, but now he saw his fame slipping into Caesar's hands. What began as cooperation was evolving into a duel of ambition. The Republic had room for powerful men, but it struggled to contain two giants at once. At first, the tension was hidden behind smiles and formal speeches. Caesar and Pompey still spoke like allies, still pretended to honor their bond, but beneath the surface, Rome's streets told another story. Supporters of each leader clashed in political rallies, their chants turning into riots. Senators leaned toward Pompey, hoping he would act as a counterbalance to Caesar's meteoric rise. Caesar, meanwhile, strengthened his grip on the people, ensuring his voice remained louder than any Senate decree. It was as though the Republic had split in two, and half beating for Pompey, the other for Caesar. Both men knew the balance couldn't last. Rome was heading toward a showdown. The Senate seized the chance to side with Pompey. They whispered warnings of Caesar's ambition, painting him as a man who sought a crown. Too many senators, Pompey seemed safer, easier to control, even if his pride matched Caesar's. But Pompey was cautious. Aligning with the Senate meant inheriting their fears and limitations, while Caesar's strength lay in his legion's devotion. The triangle between Senate, Pompey, and Caesar grew unstable, like a table with one leg about to break. Behind closed doors, Rome's leaders debated endlessly, but no compromise could hold. Everyone sensed the truth. Sooner or later, words would give way to action, and action would mean war. Caesar refused to be cornered. He demanded recognition for his service, for the years he had spent enriching Rome with new lands and wealth. His request to run for consul while still commanding his armies was bold, perhaps audacious, but it was also a shield. Without it, he would return to Rome as a private citizen, vulnerable to prosecution from enemies waiting to tear him apart. The Senate balked. To grant Caesar such privilege would be to hand him unchecked power. To deny it was to push him toward rebellion. Caesar read their hesitation as betrayal. The Republic was preparing to sacrifice him, and he would not go quietly. Meanwhile, Pompey's role shifted from ally to guardian of the Republic. The Senate gave him authority over Italy, trusting him to protect him from Caesar. It was a gamble. Pompey still respected Caesar, perhaps even admired his genius, but their friendship was now buried beneath pride and politics. He accepted the Senate's trust, fully aware it meant standing against his former ally. For citizens who had once celebrated the bond between these two titans, it felt tragic, like watching brothers turn into rivals. But for Pompey and Caesar, destiny was speaking clearly. Rome was too small for both. Only one could emerge as master. Back in Rome, Caesar's supporters worked tirelessly to keep his name alive. Pamphlets glorified his victories. Orators praised his generosity, and the common people cheered him as the Republic's true champion. Pompey's allies struck back, warning of Caesar's lust for absolute power. The city pulsed with divided loyalties. In taverns, people argued late into the night. In the streets, gangs brawled over whose hero deserved Rome's future. Yet amid the chaos, Caesar remained calm. He had long learned that panic never won wars. He trusted his legion's loyalty more than Senate decrees. And he knew when words failed, soldiers would decide the outcome. For Rome, this conflict was unprecedented. Two men, each commanding armies loyal to them personally, stood at the edge of confrontation. The Republic had seen rivalries before, but never one that threatened to unravel the entire system. Senators clung to tradition. Pompey claimed legitimacy, but Caesar held something far stronger. Unbreakable devotion. His soldiers weren't fighting for Rome, they were fighting for him. That fact shifted the balance, making civil war less a possibility and more a certainty. The city braced for impact, its ancient institutions trembling under the weight of ambition too great to contain. The Senate tried one last measure of control. They ordered Caesar to disband his armies and return to Rome alone, as a private man. To them, this was a test of loyalty. To Caesar, it was a death sentence. He knew his enemies would destroy him the moment he stepped back into the city without protection. Stripped of his legions, he would be defenseless. Caesar refused, making it clear that he would not surrender the power he had fought so hard to build. It was no longer a negotiation, it was a declaration. Rome had forced him to choose between survival and submission, and he had chosen survival. As debates raged in the Senate, the streets of Rome grew more violent. Clashes between Caesar's and Pompey's followers left the city restless, its citizens fearful of what tomorrow might bring. Neither man wanted to appear weak, and neither was willing to back down. For Caesar, this was about honor and dignity. For Pompey, it was about legitimacy and pride. Both believed destiny stood beside them. The Republic, fragile and divided, could not mediate the conflict. It was no longer about laws or traditions, it was about which man Rome would follow into the future. At last, the fateful moment arrived. Caesar stood on the banks of the Rubicon River, the border he was forbidden to cross with his legions. Behind him stood soldiers who had fought and bled with him, men who would follow him anywhere. Ahead lay Italy, Pompey, and the Senate's wrath. To hesitate meant ruin, to move forward meant war. Caesar did not waver. With a single step into the shallow waters, he cast the die of history. The die is cast, he reportedly declared. From that moment, the Republic was no longer a place of politics, but a battlefield. Rome would now decide between Caesar and Pompey, and the world would never be the same. The Rubicon was a shallow river, but it represented the deepest divide in Roman history. To cross it with legions was to declare war on the Senate, on Pompey, and on the very Republic itself. Caesar stood at its banks, weighing his choice. Behind him were soldiers who had marched with him through Gaul, men who trusted him more than any senator in Rome. Ahead lay civil war. Hesitation would mean destruction, yet action promised destiny. In the quiet of that night, Caesar made his decision. He stepped into the waters, whispering the words that would echo through centuries. The die is cast. Wheat that act. Rome's politics ended, and Rome's civil war began. Word spread quickly. Panic gripped the Senate as messengers arrived. Caesar had crossed the Rubicon, and his legions were advancing south. The senators fled Rome in chaos, some rushing to Pompey, others hiding in the countryside. Pompey himself, unprepared for Caesar's speed, retreated to regroup. For the ordinary people, the moment was surreal. They had adored both men, and now they watched their heroes tear the Republic apart. But for Caesar's soldiers, the march into Italy was not rebellion, it was loyalty in action. They were not fighting against Rome, they were fighting for the man who had always fought for them. Caesar's advance was swift and calculated. Town after town opened its gates, many citizens welcoming him as a savior rather than an invader. His reputation for fairness spread ahead of him, softening resistance. Where other generals might have plundered, Caesar restrained his men, emphasizing that this was not a war against Romans, but a fight against corruption and betrayal. His words resonated. Italy, weary of senatorial infighting, began to see him as a reformer, rather than a conqueror. Each step southward strengthened his legitimacy, proving that power was not seized by fear alone, but by trust and perception. Pompey, however, was far from defeated. Retreating to the south, he gathered allies and prepared to take the fight abroad. His strategy was patience. Avoid direct confrontation until his forces outnumbered Caesar's. The Senate, now firmly aligned with Pompey, framed him as the Republic's protector, but the contrast was striking. While Pompey fled Rome, Caesar entered it calmly, treating the capital with respect. Citizens watched in awe as Caesar walked into the city without resistance. He did not claim a crown, nor did he indulge in revenge. Instead, he presented himself as the steady hand Rome desperately needed. In that moment, he appeared less a usurper and more a statesman. Inside Rome, Caesar acted quickly to secure control without chaos. He restored order to the streets, stabilized supplies, and reassured citizens that life would continue. His ability to transition from general to administrator impressed even those who feared him. Caesar's greatest weapon was not just his army, but his image. He knew that war was as much about perception as it was about battles. By presenting himself as the calm alternative to senatorial panic, he won the confidence of ordinary Romans. The city that could have resisted instead embraced him, proving once again that Caesar's power flowed from his ability to blend strength with strategy. While Caesar secured Rome, Pompey built a coalition. From the eastern provinces came promises of ships, gold, and men. Allies across the Mediterranean pledged loyalty. Seeing Pompey as the Republic's last hope, it was clear that this conflict would not be decided in Italy alone. It would stretch across seas and continents. Caesar understood this too, and he prepared for the long campaign ahead. Yet in those early days, his advantage was psychological. Pompey had abandoned the capital, while Caesar had claimed it without a fight. To the people, it seemed as if fortune itself favored him, reinforcing the aura of inevitability that surrounded his rise. The Senate, now based with Pompey, issued declarations condemning Caesar as an enemy of the state, but their words rang hollow in the streets of Rome, where Caesar ensured stability. Markets reopened, festivals continued, and daily life returned to normal under his watch. To many, the Senate seemed distant and disconnected, while Caesar stood present and tangible. He was there in person, visible to the people. A reminder that leadership was not just about decrees from afar, but about presence in the heart of the Republic. That presence gave him legitimacy that no declaration could erase. As months passed, Caesar prepared to pursue Pompey across the seas. But before he left, he addressed the Roman people in calm, measured tones. He explained that this was not a war of conquest, but a war of restoration. He claimed he fought not against the Republic, but against those who had corrupted it. His framing was brilliant. He turned rebellion into responsibility, making himself appear not as a destroyer but as a savior. The people, exhausted by senatorial squabbling, believed him. Once again, Caesar had taken control of the narrative, shaping history even as it unfolded. The march to war was no longer avoidable. Two visions of Rome stood at Pompey's, clinging to the traditions of the Republic, and Caesar's, pointing towards something new, something more centralized, perhaps even monarchical. Citizens debated in forums and taverns, uncertain which future to embrace. But one fact was undeniable. Caesar had momentum. He had soldiers at his back, the city under his control, and the confidence to carry the fight wherever needed to go. Pompey had numbers and allies, but Caesar had loyalty and speed. The world braced for a conflict that would reshape not only Rome but the entire Mediterranean. At the dawn of the Civil War, Rome itself felt like a city holding its breath. Markets bustled, temples glowed with offerings, and festivals carried on. Yet beneath the surface, everyone knew change was coming. Caesar had taken the boldest gamble in Roman history by crossing the Rubicon, and there was no turning back. Pompey and the Senate prepared for war abroad, while Caesar strengthened his hold at home. The Republic was no longer a balance of institutions but a contest between two men. Destiny had placed them on a collision course, and all of Rome waited for the moment when words would end, and the clash of ambition would decide the future. Caesar's lightning-fast advance forced Pompey into a decision. Few thought possible he abandon Italy. Citizens were stunned. Pompey, once hailed as Rome's greatest general, chose not to fight on his home ground, but his retreat wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. Pompey believed he could not match Caesar's speed or loyalty in Italy, so he turned to the east where he had stronger allies, massive fleets, and deeper resources. In Greece, he could gather reinforcements, build his army to overwhelming size, and strike back at a time of his choosing. To the Senate, his move looked wise. To Caesar, it looked like hesitation, and hesitation, Caesar believed, was the beginning of defeat. The symbolism was powerful. Pompey left Rome, while Caesar walked in. Citizens whispered that fortune itself had chosen its favorite. Inside Rome, Caesar moved with precision. He restored order to a city trembling with uncertainty. Markets reopened, food was secured, and temples rang with prayers of relief. Caesar carefully shaped his image. Not a conqueror of Romans, but a guardian of stability. He forbade looting, punished disorder, and spoke of unity. The contrast to Pompey was striking. While Pompey gathered strength abroad, Caesar stood present in the capital, embodying calm in chaos. For ordinary Romans, the message was clear: Caesar was not tearing Rome apart. He was holding it together. Each act of discipline deepened his legitimacy. Even those who feared his ambition admitted he brought peace where the Senate had left only fear. Yet Caesar knew the real fight lay across the sea. Pompey was no ordinary rival. He was resourceful, experienced, and backed by immense wealth from the eastern province. To reach him, Caesar had to take enormous risks. With limited ships, he ferried his men across dangerous waters in small groups, often exposed to storms and naval patrols. Fortune seemed to smile on him, for despite the risks, his forces managed to cross. His men interpreted it as destiny, believing the gods themselves favored their general. Caesar encouraged this belief, reminding them that they had faced impossible odds before and triumphed. To him, morale was as valuable as swords. Soldiers who believed they could not be defeated often became unstoppable. Pompey, meanwhile, consolidated his position in Greece. He commanded a massive army outnumbering Caesar's and controlled the seas with his superior fleets. On parchment, the outcome seemed obvious: Pompey had the advantage. But wars are not fought on parchment. Caesar's men were veterans of Gaul, hardened by years of brutal campaigning, utterly devoted to their commander. Pompey's soldiers, though numerous, lacked the same bond. They respected Pompey, but they did not adore him. This difference, subtle yet profound, would shape the war. Numbers and ships could be counted, but loyalty and belief could not be measured. Caesar knew this was the lever that could tilt the balance in his favor. The two armies maneuvered cautiously at first, testing each other's strategies. Caesar pressed forward with speed, harassing supply lines, striking unexpectedly, and forcing Pompey to respond. Pompey, more cautious, avoided direct battle, hoping to stretch Caesar's resources thin. It became a chess game played on a vast board, each move echoing across the Mediterranean. Soldiers waited in tense camps, sharpening their weapons while generals sharpened their plans. Rome itself waited, too, its fate suspended in the strategies of two men. For the first time, the Republic's survival no longer depended on law or tradition, but on which general proved sharper under pressure. Even as the armies edged closer to confrontation, Caesar's pen worked as hard as his sword. He sent letters back to Rome, declaring that he fought not against the Republic but against corruption. He framed Pompey as a man clinging to privilege, while he presented himself as a reformer, fighting for justice. His propaganda was brilliant. Citizens in Rome, weary of endless senatorial squabbles, began to see Caesar not as a threat, but as a savior. The Senate, shouting from abroad, seemed distant and weak. Caesar, present and persuasive, shaped the narrative. In politics, perception often mattered more than truth, and Caesar was a master of perception. The standoff stretched on. Soldiers on both sides grew restless, eager for battle to settle the question. Pompey's officers pressured him to strike, confident in their overwhelming numbers. Caesar's men begged for combat too, trusting that their general's genius would carry them through. The camps buzzed with anticipation. rumors, and tension. Everyone sensed the climax was near. It was no longer a matter of whether they would fight, but when and where. For men who had once fought side by side, it was tragique. For history, it was inevitable. Two giants of Rome could not share the same sky forever. Caesar spoke often to his men, reminding them they were not fighting fellow Romans out of hatred, but fighting to restore dignity to the Republic. His framing made the war feel noble. Soldiers marched not as rebels, but as reformers, convinced they were protecting Rome's future. Belief is a powerful weapon, and Caesar wielded it masterfully. To his men, Pompey's army represented greed and corruption, while they stood for loyalty and justice. Whether true or not, the story gave them courage. They were no longer just soldiers. They were actors in a struggle for Rome's very soul. In Pompey's camp, the speeches told a different story. Pompey framed Caesar as a traitor, a rebel who had betrayed sacred traditions. To his men, the cause was clear. They were defending the Republic against tyranny. Yet Pompey's cautious approach sometimes weakened his message. His soldiers respected him but did not love him with the same fire Caesar's legions held for their general. Respect brings discipline, but love inspires sacrifice. The difference lingered like a shadow over Pompey's vast army, unseen but critical in the decisive moment. That difference would prove fatal. The stage was set for history's decisive confrontation. Greece became the arena where the fate of Rome would be decided. Two armies faced each other, each believing destiny stood on their side. Caesar relied on speed, loyalty, and belief. Pompey relied on numbers, fleets, and legitimacy. The world watched as tension thickened, knowing that soon the question would be answered not by words, but by the clash of legions. The future of the Republic hung in the balance, and only one man could claim it. The plains of Phaselis became the stage for one of the most dramatic confrontations in Roman history. Two armies stood across from each other. Pompey's, vast and well-supplied, and Caesar's, smaller but hardened by years of relentless campaigning. The sheer size of Pompey's forces impressed many, but numbers alone did not guarantee victory. Caesar's men were veterans who had marched with him through Gaul, endured hunger, and trusted their commander with unshakable faith. On that morning, both sides knew the stakes. This was not just a battle for territory, it was a battle for the soul of the Republic. Pompey had carefully devised his plan. He relied heavily on his superior cavalry, planning to outflank Caesar's lines and crush them from the sides. His officers were confident, his senators jubilant, believing victory was inevitable. Caesar, however, had anticipated this move. Quietly, he stationed hidden reserves of infantry behind his front lines, ready to counter when Pompey's cavalry attacked. It was a tactical masterstroke, born from years of reading battlefields like a book. Caesar did not simply react, he shaped the flow of events. When Pompey's horsemen thundered forward, expecting easy triumph, they collided with resistance that shattered their momentum. The shock of resistance spread quickly. Pompey's great advantage evaporated before his eyes. His cavalry faltered, and with their retreat, the balance of the battle tipped. Caesar seized the moment, urging his men to press forward. His presence on the field was electric. He moved along the lines, encouraging, praising, reminding his soldiers that they were not fighting against fellow Romans out of hatred, but against corruption and betrayal. That message gave them strength. They believed their struggle was not just survival, but destiny. With discipline and precision, Caesar's men began to push Pompey's forces back. As the clash intensified, the difference in leadership became clear. Caesar's decisiveness contrasted sharply with Pompey's hesitation. Pompey, usually cautious, now found himself paralyzed. He had expected Caesar to be overwhelmed, but instead, he watched his own strategy unravel. His men fought bravely, but without the bond of loyalty that Caesar's soldiers shared. Their lines wavered under pressure. Respect for a commander can hold an army steady. Love for a commander can drive it through fire. Caesar's troops loved him, and that love turned the tide. The battle's turning point came when Caesar's hidden reserves drove Pompey's cavalry completely from the field. Without their protection, Pompey's infantry stood exposed. Caesar's soldiers pressed forward with relentless discipline, their formations tight, their morale unshakable. Panic began to spread through Pompey's vast army. Dust clouded the air, Orders were lost in the chaos, and the Senate's proud forces began to crumble. Caesar, ever observant, exploited every weakness, transforming moments of disorder into irreversible defeats. His genius was not in brute force, but in the ability to strike at the perfect moment. Pompey, watching from a distance, felt despair creep in. The man who had once been Rome's greatest general now faced the reality of defeat. His cavalry gone, his infantry breaking, his strategy shattered. There was nothing left to hold the line. For Pompey, the battle was no longer about victory but survival. He withdrew from the field, leaving his men leaderless. That decision sealed the outcome. Once their commander fled, Pompey's soldiers could no longer resist Caesar's relentless advance. The Republic's defender had abandoned his post, and history shifted in an instant. Caesar's men, exhausted but victorious, realized they had achieved the impossible. Outnumbered and underestimated, they had defeated a force that many believed invincible. Their faith in Caesar had been justified, and their devotion deepened. For them, Phasaelas was not just another campaign, it was proof that loyalty and discipline could overcome any odds. They looked to their general not only as a commander, but as the embodiment of Rome's destiny. The bond forged in that battle would carry them through every challenge yet to come. The consequences of Phasaelas rippled far beyond the battlefield. In a single day, the balance of power in Rome had been rewritten. Pompey's authority crumbled, the Senate's cause fractured, and Caesar emerged as the undisputed master of Rome's legions. News of the victory spread quickly, stunning allies and enemies alike. To some, it was a moment of triumph. To others, it was the death knell of the Republic. Yet everyone understood one truth: Rome would never be the same again. The Republic had yielded to the will of one man, yet Caesar's response to victory revealed something of his character. He did not indulge in cruelty or mass revenge. Instead, he offered clemency to many of his captured enemies, seeking reconciliation rather than destruction. This act, calculated as much as it was merciful, deepened his legend. It showed that Caesar was not merely a conqueror, but a leader who understood the power of forgiveness in consolidating authority. By sparing those who had fought against him, he transformed enemies into potential allies, weaving the fabric of his new Rome. For Pompey, Phasaelas was the end of his glory. Once celebrated as Rome's greatest commander, he now became a fugitive, fleeing across the seas in search of refuge. His dream of defending the Republic collapsed in dust and retreat. Caesar, meanwhile, stood at the height of his power. The man who had crossed the Rubicon against impossible odds had now proven his destiny on the fields of Greece. Phasaelas was not just a battle, it was the turning point of history. The moment when Caesar became unstoppable, and the Republic, as it had been for centuries, breathed its final breaths. Pompey fled from Phasaelas in shock, his pride shattered as much as his army. For decades, he had been the Republic's greatest general, the man whose very name struck awe across the Mediterranean. But now, defeated by a rival he once considered junior, Pompey sought safety across the seas. His flight was desperate and uncertain. Accompanied by a small band of loyalists, he sailed eastward, looking for allies in lands where his influence still lingered. His mind must have swirled with questions. How had it all collapsed so quickly? How had Caesar outnumbered and underestimated turned certain victory into ruin? Pompey had once believed himself untouchable. Now he was a fugitive, clinging not to glory, but to survival. Caesar wasted no time. For him, victory at Phasaelas was not enough. He needed to secure the future by eliminating the threat of Pompey's return. With speed that had become his trademark, Caesar reorganized his forces and set out in pursuit. He understood Pompey's character well: cautious, calculating, unwilling to surrender easily. That made him dangerous. If Pompey reached Egypt with eastern provinces, he might gather new armies, restart the war, and prolong the Republic's agony. Caesar could not allow that. His march was relentless, every mile carrying him closer to the man who once shared power with him. The chase was not just military, it was personal. As Pompey sought refuge, he turned toward Egypt, a kingdom in turmoil. The Ptolemaic dynasty was locked in its own civil strife. Between Jan Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra, Pompey believed his reputation would win him protection. After all, He had once secured Egypt's throne years earlier. He expected gratitude, perhaps even an alliance. Instead, he found suspicion. Egypt's court feared that siding with Pompey might anger Caesar, who now looked unstoppable. In a cruel twist of fate, the very place Pompey thought would save him saw him as a liability. His arrival marked not safety, but betrayal. When news of Pompey's death reached Caesar, the reaction surprised many. Instead of celebration, Caesar reportedly wept. This was not merely the fall of an enemy, it was the tragic end of a man who had once been his ally, his son-in-law, and the other pillar of Rome's power. Pompey's defeat had been inevitable, but his death in foreign lands felt bitter. Caesar understood the symbolism. The Republic's proudest defender had not fallen in the Senate, nor on a Roman battlefield, but in exile, cut down far from the city he once dominated. For Caesar, the moment underscored both the fragility of power and the loneliness of destiny. In Rome, news of Pharsalus and Pompey's demise sent shockwaves through society. Supporters of the Senate were demoralized, their cause fractured beyond repair. Ordinary citizens, however, embraced Caesar as the undisputed leader. Statues were raised, celebrations held, and whispers grew louder that perhaps the Republic had finally found its new master. Yet beneath the joy was unease. Romans had long prided themselves on resisting kingship, on balancing power through the Senate. Now, one man stood above all. Caesar reassured them with promises of clemency, insisting he was no tyrant. But doubts lingered. Could any man hold such power and resist the temptation of absolute rule? Caesar knew appearances mattered. He chose to forgive many of his enemies, extending mercy to senators who had once raised arms against him. This policy of clemency shocked Rome. Instead of endless executions, there were pardons and reconciliations. Some saw it as genuine generosity, others as cold calculation. By sparing his foes, Caesar not only reduced resistance, but also bound them to him by gratitude and obligation. His clemency became as powerful a weapon as his legions. It transformed him from conqueror into statesman, solidifying his authority without further bloodshed. For a time, Rome believed his assurances of peace, yet victory brought new challenges. Caesar now faced the daunting task of governing a republic fractured by war. Provinces needed stability, the treasury required replenishment, and citizens demanded reform. Caesar embraced the challenge with energy, reorganizing debts, rewarding loyal veterans, and planning ambitious projects for Rome's future. He spoke not of dictatorship but of renewal, portraying himself as the man who would heal a broken republic. His words resonated, but his actions carried a deeper implication. By concentrating authority in his own hands, Caesar was reshaping the Republic into something new. Whether Romans admitted it or not, the Republic of old was gone. Meanwhile, Egypt became the next stage of Caesar's story. Pursuing Pompey had drawn him into the Ptolemaic struggle, and soon he found himself entangled in the politics of Alexandria. There, he met Cleopatra, whose intelligence and charisma would leave an indelible mark on his destiny. Their alliance was both political and personal, reshaping not only Caesar's future, but also the balance of power in the Mediterranean. What began as a pursuit of Pompey transformed into a partnership that would echo through centuries. Cleopatra's presence brought intrigue, opportunity, and scandal, further intertwining Caesar's name with legend. Rome watched with fascination and unease. Some celebrated Caesar's victories and alliances as proof of his unmatched genius. Others worried that his time in Egypt distracted him from the Republic's needs. Rumors spread, stories twisted, and debates flared in the Senate. Was Caesar still the defender of Rome, or was he becoming something larger? Perhaps even a monarch in all but name. His relationship with Cleopatra, combined with his unrivaled power, fueled both admiration and suspicion. Caesar, however, seemed he knew his destiny was not in appeasing doubters, but in shaping Rome according to his vision. The pursuit of Pompey had ended not with a clash of armies but with a dramatic shift in Caesar's path. Pompey's death removed the last great rival standing between him and absolute dominance. Yet it also opened new questions about the future. Would Caesar rebuild the Republic, or replace it with his own creation? Would his mercy secure loyalty, or breed resentment? And would his alliances abroad strengthen Rome, or divide it further? These questions lingered as Caesar returned to Rome. carrying with him the aura of invincibility. One era had ended with Pompey's fall, and another defined by Caesar alone was about to begin. Caesar's arrival in Egypt after Pompey's demise placed him in the middle of another civil conflict, the rivalry between the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra. Egypt was not just any province, it was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, a kingdom whose wealth and grain supply made it invaluable. Caesar, always pragmatic, recognized the importance of choosing the right ally. He encountered Cleopatra, a woman of extraordinary intelligence and charisma. Unlike many rulers who relied solely on birthright, Cleopatra wielded wit, charm, and strategy with disarming skill. Their meeting changed both their fates. What began as politics soon turned into partnership, binding Rome and Egypt in ways neither Senate nor Nile could have predicted. Cleopatra understood Caesar's needs as well as her own. She offered him wealth and ships, resources he badly required for the next stage of his campaigns. In return, Caesar offered legitimacy to her contested throne. Their alliance was practical, but it carried sparks that ignited gossip across the ancient world. Cleopatra was young yet formidable. Caesar older but equally captivated. Together, they embodied ambition on a grand scale. To her, Caesar was a path to secure her dynasty. To him, Cleopatra was a key to securing Egypt's loyalty. Politics and passion intertwined, reshaping Mediterranean power dynamics in ways that rippled far beyond Alexandria. Their time in Alexandria was dramatic. Caesar became entangled in Egypt's internal conflict, supporting Cleopatra against a brother. Battles within the city tested his patience and his resolve, yet he remained focused. Caesar's discipline and tactical brilliance ensured Cleopatra's survival and eventual dominance. With her restored as queen, Egypt became a crucial ally. For Caesar, this victory was more than romance or politics. It was a demonstration that he could influence not only Rome but foreign thrones as well. The message was clear. Wherever Caesar went, the balance of power shifted. His reach was no longer confined to the Republic. It had become global. Back in Rome, rumors spread. Senators who already feared Caesar's ambition now fretted over his connection to Cleopatra. They whispered that he aimed to become a king, perhaps even merge Rome with Egypt. Citizens, meanwhile, were fascinated by the stories. Tales of Cleopatra's beauty, wit, and alliance with Caesar filled the city. Some admired him for forging such powerful ties. Others saw it as dangerous indulgence. Yet, regardless of opinion, one fact was undeniable. Caesar had returned to Rome with greater prestige than ever. He was not only a conqueror of Gaul and Pompey, but also the kingmaker of Egypt. When Caesar finally returned to Rome, he did so not as a politician among equals, but as master of the Republic. Triumphs were held to celebrate his victories. Citizens lined the streets, cheering as parades showcased wealth, prisoners, and the sheer scale of his conquests. The Senate had little choice but to honor him, even as they grumbled in private. Caesar's power was undeniable. He was elected consul again, appointed dictator for limited terms, and entrusted with authority that stretched beyond precedent. To their people, it was a hero. To the Senate, was a storm they could not contain. Caesar used his new authority to launch reforms. He tackled debts that weighed on citizens, introduced laws to reward veterans, and planned ambitious projects to improve Rome's infrastructure. His vision extended beyond war. He wanted to reshape society itself. Calendars were reformed, colonies established, and citizenship extended to more people in the provinces. These actions secured loyalty from ordinary Romans and provincial allies alike. Yet they also stirred unease. To conservatives, Caesar was dismantling tradition piece by piece. To reformers, he was the leader Rome had always needed. Either way, his imprint on the Republic grew indelible. Despite reforms, tensions lingered. Senators grumbled that Caesar's accumulation of honors resembled monarchy. Statues were raised, his image appeared in temples, and honors once reserved for gods were now associated with him. Caesar dismissed accusations, insisting he remained loyal to the Republic. But the symbols told another story. Ordinary citizens adored him, but elites feared that he had crossed an invisible line. The dream of restoring balance seemed gone. Instead, Rome stood under the shadow of one man, whose power eclipsed every office, every law, and every tradition. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra only added to the controversy. She visited Rome, living in a villa provided by Caesar, sparking outrage among senators. To them, her presence symbolized foreign influence, perhaps even a threat to Roman values. For the people, it was exotic, scandalous, and thrilling. Cleopatra brought with her the mystique of Egypt, its wealth, and its allure. Caesar appeared unfazed by criticism, as if to say that his power placed him above whispers. For him, alliances mattered more than appearances, and Cleopatra was too valuable to dismiss. But in Rome's rigid political culture, such defiance planted seeds of resentment. Even as Caesar consolidated power, he continued to show mercy to former enemies. Many who had fought for Pompey found themselves pardoned, welcomed back into Roman society. This clemency enhanced his reputation among the people but worried elites who saw it as manipulation. By forgiving foes, Caesar turned them into dependents, further expanding his circle of loyalty. It was a clever tactic, yet it deepened fears that his ultimate goal was absolute dominance. Rome's senators, already uneasy, began to whisper in darker tones. Their question was no longer whether Caesar was powerful, but whether he was too powerful. By the end of his return, Caesar stood at the zenith of his career. He had defeated Pompey, repaid the Rome, and entangled himself with Cleopatra, blending politics and legend in equal measure. Yet within the Senate's marble halls, shadows lengthened. Some saw in him the founder of a new golden age. Others saw the end of the Republic. Caesar believed he was shaping a brighter future, but enemies believed he was strangling tradition. The stage was set for triumph and tragedy, for reforms and resistance. Rome's fate, once held in balance, now rested entirely on the shoulders of one man whose destiny seemed unstoppable.